So let me ask you both something, if I may. What's harder, not texting them or not responding when they text you?
Responding.
Yeah, definitely responding.
Even after everything?
Well, because the second they reach out, your brain starts asking, what if this time is different?
Maybe this is the conversation I've been waiting for.
And sometimes you're not even texting them. You're just hoping that they're going to text us.
Or you've blocked them and then unblocked them, not because you wanted to reach out, but just because you know you wanted to know if they've tried reaching you.
And I think that's harder to admit than sending the text because, well, if you've ever done that, it probably means you already knew the relationship wasn't healthy. So why is the pull still there? And today we're asking, why can't we stop reaching out? Welcome back to the Existential Couch. I'm Brian.
And I'm Wendy.
Every week, we take one question and talk all the way through psychology, philosophy, and whatever comes up from our own lives to help us understand the whole picture of our life a little bit.
Today's conversation is mostly about romantic relationships because that's where our stories come from. But if you're listening and thinking about a parent, a friendship, or another relationship that's been hard to let go of, I think you'll find yourself in this conversation too. I've wanted to have this conversation for a while because today's guest has a way of taking experiences people often carry a lot of shame around and helping them finally make sense of it. Dr. Ruth is the founder of Healing by the Numbers, an educational platform dedicated to helping survivors recognize unhealthy relationship patterns, rebuild trust in themselves, and heal after abuse. She's a researcher, statistician, and survivor of a 10-year abusive marriage whose work blends science, data, and lived experience in a way I think is incredibly unique. Dr. Ruth, welcome to the Existential Couch.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. So, this is one of the conversations I'm really passionate about because so many people carry shame about still missing someone who hurt them. So, I hope by the end of this, people understand that they're not broken.
So, with that, today we're asking, once again, why can't we stop reaching out to someone who hurt us? So, let's get on the couch.
So, before we get into the why of why this happens, Dr. Ruth, I'd love you to tell everyone the story about the cat because I think this captures this better than almost anything else.
Oh, goodness. So, after I left my ex-husband, I moved into an apartment on my own, and for a while it was great. And then I started to miss him. I started to miss him a lot. And one night in particular, I was sitting on my couch and I was looking through all the old photos of us, vacation photos, birthday photos, whatever. And I just couldn't stop missing him and thinking about him. And I started to watch all the videos too. And one video in particular was a video of a fight that we had very near the end of our relationship. And I started recording them because I was nervous about what he was capable of doing. And I started playing that video, and my cat Leo, ran in from the other room and started freaking out. He was meowing at me and butting his head into me and like looking all the room, panicking. And I realized he was reacting to my ex's voice. So, like, first I turned off the recording right away and then tried to calm him down. And I was like, Leo, it's okay. It's okay. He's not here. Like, he doesn't even know where we are. We're 2 hours away from him. And then it kind of hit me what I was saying to my cat. And I was like, oh my God, my cat was in an abusive relationship. My cat is traumatized. Oh my gosh, I was in an abusive relationship. And it was a dark night. We both cried a lot for the rest of the night.
Holy cow. Brian, what is your experience with anything like this?
Yeah, too much, I think. It was very normal for me growing up. That's all I kind of saw in most cases right up until leaving. I feel like I'm kind of the cat in the story, to be honest with you, when it comes to that. And I mean, I remember trying to break up fights in those types of things and not being in a good place. But I also remember my first marriage being not a very good place that I looked for a place that was similar to that even in my life.
I think I can definitely relate from a relationship that I was in for a couple years that was fairly abusive, and I did everything. Like, I left, and the first time I took the cat, and then there was his cat, but I was scared and I took the cat, and then I started feeling guilty for blocking him, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if he's worried about the cat? What if his mental health isn't doing okay? Like, I started thinking, like, so I unblocked him. And then I saw that there were all these messages, and then I was tempted to respond, which is what I think a lot of us can relate to. And I know a lot of people I've talked to on threads and friends of mine have been through this where they will be solid in leaving and not talking to this person. And then even as much as a year later, they're unblocking and reconnecting and ending back up in relationships. I ended up back in the relationship after doing that because I built trust that shouldn't have been built.
It's weird from my perspective, and I invite perspective from the other of doing the opposite. Like I know that it was terrifying for me to continue calling, but at the same time, like my ex-wife had taken our daughter and
Mm-hmm.
traveled south of where I was when I was still in the military, so it was difficult for me. But I felt terrible because I feel like I didn't call enough to talk to my daughter, but I also felt like calling more was going to lead to a bad environment
Mm-hmm.
that I couldn't be a part of and control. So I don't know if there's even like a connection there of like the kind of opposite of that.
What do you think we're actually reaching back for when we have these moments? Either one of you.
I think for me, what I was trying to reach back for was like the idea of who I wanted him to be and the idea of who I thought he was. For we were married for 10 years, and I not only thought this is my person, I thought like
Mm-hmm.
I'm so lucky. He's amazing because he was amazing for the first year we were together.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was always trying to get that back, and it wasn't real.
Isn't that the case? And for so many of us, I think that honeymoon in the beginning is so perfect. And then we spend the rest of the relationship, like you said, trying to get that back. I've definitely experienced that. Like, I know that whenever we started texting again and getting phone calls again after unblocking and having some space, he started acting like that person again that I had met in the beginning. And that was like such the draw. I was like, oh, well, maybe he's changed.
And if I can, Wendy, I was actually really resonating with something you said. You unblocked him because you thought he might be concerned about the cat and like asking you how you were doing. And I did the exact same thing with my ex. I blocked him. I felt really good. And then I went, well, I took the cats and he might be concerned about them. So maybe I should like let him check in on them. And it was a mistake. It was a
Yeah,
mistake.
it was a mistake for me too. So, do you think there's a difference between missing someone and wanting them back?
I think that yes,
Yes.
and I think there's also kind of more more options even on that as well. The more I think about it, I think there's also not even necessarily. I don't know if it's wanting them back, but also wanting maybe the peace or comfort you had at the beginning. That version of them. So I think it's different than wanting the person. You want a version of the person.
I could see that because missing someone doesn't necessarily mean you should be with them. For And I think like hope can survive even after the trust is gone. And I think a lot of us have a lot of hope still for these relationships that we invested so much time in.
I agree completely.
So I would ask, because obviously we've both kind of described the situations of unblocking and allowing that contact, wherever the reason was, the
Hmm.
cat's, safety, feeling sorry, or even guilty in our own way, like we do too
Yeah.
often. So we've discussed, and let me ask this: you talked about both going back, whether it was the unblocking for the cat or those types of things, and that maybe the guilt that you felt and allowing that connection to another being, but in a way also still to yourself. What do you think that you actually were hoping for out of that? Was it really for the cat or was it for yourself?
Powerful question. I think that
It
gets at
really
something.
is.
I think that gets
Hmm.
at something that survivors, at least a lot of the survivors I've worked with, have this thing of what you tell yourself, what you tell others, and what you actually feel in your heart. And I know for me, I unblocked him because I wanted him to be able to ask about the cat, but I also hoped he would ask about me and express
Yeah.
some regret or some feelings about, the fact that I just left and moved out. And maybe he had some remorse or some apologies for me. And I think it was at the end of the day a lot more about me because my ex didn't like my cat. He didn't care that much about how my cat was doing. I knew at the time it was for me and not my cat.
That's a red flag right there. I mean, to be
Well,
honest.
there you go. There you go. I can definitely relate and feel the same way. Like it was more about like, does he miss me? Like the cat was just part of it. That was the excuse.
And I think that's in the connection for myself. I feel like I wanted for the first time it to be about me. I wanted there to be like caring towards me that I didn't actually feel throughout the entire relationship. It was always about something else for because my daughter was going to be born or these types of things, but it wasn't actually anyone or her caring about me or what I was bringing or anything like that. It was just the comfortable condition that they could be in that I create.
That makes sense. I think listening to all of us, something keeps sticking with me. None of us are describing making a logical decision. We're describing almost feeling pulled. So, like, what is that?
I think it's also for me, and what I have seen a lot, especially from the male perspective, and talking to other men, is you get to a certain point where it's not about the other person or necessarily the relationship or the attachment or feeling, but it's the comfort you found in your life and being in that relationship and any disruption. And kind of either start to break it down, or the fear of losing it is it's all about getting that comfort back versus the other person. I don't know how common that is from the other side. Obviously, Dr. Ruth or Wendy, I can let you speak to that.
Definitely relate to that. And I think it's something that's not talked about enough. And that even if you're in a bad relationship, even if you're in an abusive relationship, there are things in your life that you like. And there's things in your life that are predictable and bring you comfort and sort of that everyday, ordinary sort of Tuesday night comfort. I sat on the couch and held my ex's hand while we watched our favorite shows. Like just those little things that are present even in very abusive relationships. But I also want to touch on, for me, as we're thinking of what's pulling us back to the situation, knowing that my ex was very abusive, I think one of the things that kept pulling me back was this idea that I had to keep checking on him. Like I had to keep checking in on his emotional well-being.
Me too.
Yeah, because if in the past, if his emotional well-being was not good, that meant my safety was at risk.
Yes,
So
exactly. Exactly.
yeah,
You nailed it.
yeah. So even after I was out, I felt like I had this constant desire to check in on him because it had become such a habit at keeping myself safe over the 10 years I was with him.
Well, because I mean, I feel scared of this person. And so having communication with them of some kind gives me an insight to what their mental state is like and whether or not the perception of my safety is there. And I think like one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you leave someone, your feelings should disappear too. But attachment definitely doesn't work like an on off switch. You spend months or years building a connection with this person. Your brain doesn't erase that overnight because you made the right decision. And that's why someone can honestly say, I know I shouldn't go back. And honestly say, I still miss them, because both things can be true. And that's, I think, a big component in why, well, it's something I learned about attachment is that. And so I don't know if that lines up with what you've seen, Dr. Ruth.
Yeah, absolutely. That how we think about attachment and how we think about love is often so intertwined. And I'm of the opinion that you can absolutely love someone you're in an abusive relationship with. I
Yes,
won't get into whether or not they truly love you back. That is a different topic.
that
But
for sure.
I think you
Fair.
can
That's fair.
truly love someone
I
who
agree with
abuses
you.
you.
Yes.
And you can be profoundly dysfunctionally attached to them. And one of them is something to fix after you're out of the situation. And that requires work, often therapy, a lot of journaling in my case. But I think the love is not something you have to fix. I think you can just move forward knowing that the love can live in the memories of the relationship and doesn't have to be something in your day-to-day life now.
And it doesn't have to be something you go back to.
That too.
I think even for me, the attachment was legitimately guilt from my side, and I've obviously now dealt with a lot of looking back into self sabotage behavior and into the kind of hyposensitive things that I've found through therapy. But I felt that I kind of went back and had conversations because I felt more guilty about the things and approaches, the wrong approaches that I took to affect the relationship I didn't want to be in, more than the abuse I was getting while still in the relationship. Obviously, I don't know if that's a common thing or not, but I'm not proud of the approaches that I took, looking for extramarital things in the first relationship, after, outside of the abuse, and to look for those things. Obviously, the better option is to just leave, but it doesn't feel like an option sometimes, and so terrible, crappy things become better options. And I feel like that guilt built up more, and actually, that was I don't want to call it attraction. That was the pulling in factor rather than attraction.
That makes sense. So I was thinking, why do people assume missing someone means they should go back? Because I think that's a big one. Because I hear that all the time. I miss him. I miss him.
Yeah, I think we're logical beings at our core. And I think there's this natural tendency to go, I miss him, so I should go back. As humans, we always want to fill in the so, like there's a before and an after to every sentence. And I don't think that has to be the case. I think, like you said, Wendy, we can just say, I miss them. End of sentence. There doesn't have to be something else that you do because you miss them. You can just sit in the feeling and let it be just that. a feeling.
Well, on the logical side, because there's moments when we feel logical, right? We can kind of really grasp onto those things, and the attachment, like you explain, the illogical side of it explains why the feelings are still there. But if we have those attachments of logic, sometimes why is it still almost impossible not to check the phone, not to try and go back, not to explore those things? With the idea of attachment, like I just talked about, the illogical side and logical side, when we do, even when we do grasp onto that logical portion, why even then does it still feel almost impossible not to check your phone and to see if there is a reach out or if that connection is?
Well, one comparison I've heard people make is that it's like a slot machine. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
I mean, the amount of slot machines that I've played, it's starting to feel like that without thinking about it before. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to say yes while thinking about it a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely brilliant analogy because intermittent reinforcement is like you have one positive interaction with them and then 8 negative ones, and you have no idea if it's going to be positive, positive, and then the 8 negative or negative,
Hmm.
positive, negative, positive. And that lack of a predictable pattern sets your brain up for almost addictive behavior in a way. And there was actually a really interesting study I was trying to find before we did this, where they looked at lab rats who were getting a reward on different levels of reinforcement. And there was a group who were getting it every time they pressed a button. There were a group that were getting it every like 5 times they pressed a button. And then there was a third group who was getting it randomly. They could press a button and get a reward, or they could press a button and not get it. And eventually the researchers cut off the reward completely. And those who were getting it every
Okay.
time pressed it for a while and then stopped. Those who were getting it every 10 times, 5 times, whatever it was, pressed it for longer, but then eventually stopped. And the one group that did not ever stop was the one who was randomly getting it because they kept thinking, maybe this time it'll be time for me to get the
Oh my
reward. They
gosh.
never stopped.
I've heard about this study, and yes, I mean, how true is that? Because when you're getting those random responses, just like a slot machine, you're gonna want to reach out. You're gonna want to check your phone. You're gonna want those things. And I think one of the hardest things about an unhealthy relationship is that it usually isn't bad all the time. And if it were, leaving would be so much easier. And instead, there's just enough good moments to keep hope alive. They might send you a nice text, they might apologize, you might have a good weekend, or a promise they'll change, and your brain starts thinking maybe this is the beginning of something different. And then inevitably, things get bad again, then good again. And then over time, it's not the good moments that keep you hooked, it's the uncertainty. And so I think if you keep waiting for the next good moment because you know it's possible, that's how it's like a slot machine. If it never paid out, you'd stop playing. And if it paid out every time, it wouldn't hold your attention in the same way, just like with the rats and the random study. And so I don't think it means people are gambling addicts because they stayed in abusive relationships, to be clear, but it means our brains are wired to keep chasing unpredictable rewards, which is why that maybe this time can definitely be so powerful, I think.
And I, my brain was going somewhere else with that, and the kind of making the analogy more concrete even for me because that just brought a rush of even playing slot machines and the exact motion of no, one more time, one more time. But is there like obviously we see that from like especially in my case watching my parents and that relationship and parents before them and this generational thing that I'm actually seeing in the environment. You just have like that study of rats. I know that there was another one that really showed generational trauma and like a trauma gene. Do you feel like, from your perspective, Doctor, there's also that side of it that we're battling, where we literally ingrained in our DNA learned like trauma responses that our ancestors have learned through time, and now we're fighting against those things as well on top of it, sort of that illogical behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's super valid too. And I think it's one of those things that when you've been, or when your ancestors have been, your parents, grandparents have been in those situations over a long period of time, those sort of learned responses do become part of not only your DNA potentially, but also your family's shared history, how you've
Oh,
been brought
yeah.
up, what you've been told to expect. And they're powerful because they are rooted in survival. In my case, my ex-husband was not only dangerous, he was also significantly larger than me. He was prone to dramatic, angry outbursts. And I knew that my survival depended on not upsetting him too much. So they're really powerful
Exactly.
because they are rooted in keeping you safe, which is all your body and mind really want to do. It.
I think that's relatable. I know I definitely had pre-existing trauma responses from how I grew up or other trauma or other relationships I'd been in that hadn't been healthy. or things like that. And so that definitely led me to have those same responses in the relationship that I've been referencing in this conversation tonight.
Absolutely. And I think that's also, it does, bringing that up and from the two different studies is also kind of a danger. I feel like the trap we fall into is also that, like, it's either one or the other, when in reality it's a combination. Like these mice that had their grandparents were kind of shocked at their feet, for, then their grandpup mice learned that, you should be careful of this type of flora, this environment. But then those mice could also be in a situation like the study that you described. They probably could have been pulled over and continued to learn something else and still kind of fought against that. So I feel like there's also a trap of, oh, it must be just because of my generational, or it must be because of my environment. When in reality, all of these factors of what we're learning and working against attraction, or the illogical portion of it, is from just a multifaceted approach that we're kind of battling against. And that's why I think discussions and therapy and all these different focuses are so important. Yep.
Oh, for sure. I definitely thinking about some of the other reasons why we do we have these attachments and different things is cognitive dissonance. Like imagine just spending years loving someone, building a life with them, defending them, making excuses for them, and then you realize eventually that they're abusive because you don't always realize that initially. It could, I think once you make that admission, that's huge, but you're not just grieving the relationship anymore. You're grieving the years you spent believing a story that wasn't true. And I think that's an incredibly painful thing for any brain to accept. So sometimes your brain starts looking for another explanation. Maybe they changed. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe if we could just have one more conversation, everything would make sense. And it's not because you're weak and it's not because you're irrational, because accepting the truth means grieving the relationship you had, the future you imagined, and the times you can't get back. So sometimes it's easier, I think, to keep searching for evidence that rewrites the story than to accept the story that actually happened.
Well, admitting
Yeah.
things is often the hardest part, right? Admitting we were wrong is a very difficult thing to do in many cases. And admitting, like, knowing that I was abused or saw the abuse or was a part of it is much different than also saying, like, oh, hey, now I have to really admit to sometimes every individual piece of it to work through it. And each little piece feels enormous. And then when you put them all together into a large part of your lifetime, it's hard to admit the loss of that time as well. And say just admitting it in general. But I guess my question is, does accepting truth also mean that you're gonna automatically have to grieve those years that truth happened?
I think yes. I think by
Yes,
default, it's a yes, you have to
yes,
grieve it once you accept that is
you
the
do.
truth. And that's why it's so hard. And I had my own terrible moment with this where I was out for a walk and I realized I had this moment of clarity where if my best friend came to me and said, my fiance is doing all these things to me, my immediate response to her, my knee jerk response would be, he's abusive. You need to
Yeah.
leave. And to realize that was my response and then apply it to my own life, I went, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like, I can't accept I'm in an abusive relationship. I've been with him for a decade. He controls all our finances. I got with him when I was 20. I was 30 at that point. My entire adult life had been with him. It was just overwhelming to accept that I was in an abusive relationship because of what that immediately implied. We talked earlier about that humans are logical. If you find this, you then want to go, so this is true.
Hmm.
And that's exactly where my brain went. I'm in an abusive relationship,
Yeah.
so I have to leave. And that's the
Yeah.
hard part of that sentence.
It is. It really is. And I think we don't give enough. I think a lot of people are like, well, I left and then I went back and now I'm stuck here again. Or if I leave again and I go, what if I go back again? And I think I've heard the statistic that the average person tries to leave about 7 times. Is it 7? Yeah. So, gone back, if you're listening to this and you've gone back to a relationship or whether it's with family or romantic or anything like that, and you've gone back or you've reached back out or you've recommunicated with them, you don't need to feel shame around that. And a lot of us do feel shame around that. And I think that's such an important thing to recognize is that this is so common for our brains to get trapped in these cycles. There's definitely processes going on in the brain that are beyond what our logical mind can control that kind of play into this, I think, a little bit. And I don't know if you want to talk about any of that, either one of you, what you know about that, but
think shame is something I see with a lot of the survivors I work with. There's a lot of shame about not only being in an abusive relationship, but like you said, also going back because so many of us do. I personally not only tried to get away from my ex, had three different escape plans before the one that ultimately worked, but I also went back to him twice
Mhm.
after I legitimately escaped. And it's hard. It's incredibly hard to stay away. And there's
So
not
hard.
enough discussion about that because if you haven't been in it, the immediate knee jerk reaction for people is, well, why didn't you just stay away? Is he abusive or not? Like one or the other. If you go back,
Mm.
you're automatically invalidating what you just told me that he's abusive. And that is not the case at all.
Yeah, I feel like, well, the one that rhymes with shame, blame gets such a wrench in all of that when people from the outside do that. And they, especially when you're looking for help and those that kind of fall into the trap of feeling like they just need to give advice or things like that. It's always like, well, you went back, you went back, like you just said, you went back twice, so it couldn't have been that bad. Like, no normal person would have done that. It's like, first of all, you're not a normal person either, so shush. Like, it's a crazy thing to say to somebody. Like,
Yeah.
oh, punched you in the face. Well, you couldn't have punched you too hard because, yeah, you did it twice. Like, that's a wild thing when you take it to when you take a situation and put it to the extreme and then make them say it again. I've had to do that a few times on the military side of getting people to break out of a cycle. Like, hey, okay,
Mhm.
take it to this level and say that to me again and tell me that wasn't the craziest thing that's ever come out of your mouth. And you do have to step back and be like, oh goodness, like I'm not in a good place. And normalization, I know sounds like such a dirty word to a lot of people for some reason, but normalizing like shame and coming out the other side and acceptance and
Yeah.
pain and guilt and facing those things is such an important part of the process.
I think so. And to touch back on the grief that we were talking about, I think one question that still feels unanswered is this: it wasn't really about the relationship. What were we actually grieving?
Yeah, I mean, I have to still say the thought. I was grieving the thought of acceptance and thinking that I was making better choices until I realized I had actually just fallen into the same trap that I wanted to get away. That's why I moved across the planet, when I was 18. I didn't want to be
Yeah.
in that type of situation anymore and ended up in Japan. And then what did I do? No, I made the same exact choice and
Yeah.
got into the same pattern with someone else.
I think I've definitely repeated those patterns over and over, and it took a lot of therapy and learning. Like, I mean, I think to what really helped me finally leave was I've talked about this before. I started ketamine therapy with a doctor, and it gave me a different perspective on the relationship I was in, and I was able to look at it from the outside, from an outside perspective almost, and kind of see that what was going on I needed to get out of, and I was able to have that support from the ketamine therapy and my therapist and the people in my life helping me leave. I had a better support network, and that made a big difference too. I'm not saying you need ketamine to leave an abusive relationship, just to be clear. That's just something that helped me, like Dr. Ruth mentioned journaling. So I think maybe the better question is not why can't I let go of them, but it's what am I actually trying to hold on to?
I've been thinking about this, and I think this ties into the grief question a lot for me because what I
Mhm.
was really grieving in the relationship, I realized after years out of it, was myself. I was grieving my 20-year-old self who went into that relationship. He was my first serious boyfriend, and I loved him so much. And I was so naive and so
Yeah,
hopeful and so bright and vibrant back then. And I realized I was really grieving that version of me who never actually got to exist. And
that's
that
so
was really
powerful.
sad.
It is really sad. And
But
I think, like, I won't call my first marriage necessarily abusive, but it wasn't healthy. And I think and that started when I was 20, and we were together until we were 27, I believe. So almost as long as you were in your relationship, and I can definitely relate to what it's like to grieve that earlier version of yourself. For
And I almost
sure.
wonder if we're trying to hold on to that younger version and like make sure that they didn't quote unquote suffer in vain. Like,
Mhm.
even though there were some bad patches, like we made it work, we stuck together, and look, that version of me, they came out the other side and like the relationship is okay now. I just had to communicate with them better. And I think I was really trying to hold on to her. And it wasn't until I let her go and realized that she's gone that I could move on with a version of me who exists now, who is not as naive and also not as bright and energetic and fun.
I mean, and that right there, like I blamed a lot of things. Like, oh, I have Oh, she's gonna have a kid, so I have to stay with. I gotta marry her.
Hmm.
I have to now that the kid's there. I have to be a better father than I had. I have to, do the right thing, and all of these things. And I kept having all these reasons to stick around and to do the right thing. I kept telling myself, but I told myself it was the right thing. But at the same time, I felt that the version of me I wanted to exist was never going to exist anyway because it was already too late. And I feel like that's a big part of the reason as well that I didn't have the hope that there was another side of it either.
I think I was grieving the future that I thought we would have too. And like I had this imaginary future built up in my brain of the good parts of our relationship, the fairy tale parts of our relationship. And that's what I was projecting into the future. And I had this whole future mapped out for myself. And I had to grieve the loss of that too whenever things ended. I think that was really hard for me.
That's so
'Cause
relatable. I had
'cause
the
I
same
kept
thing.
hoping for a version of him that I kept would come back, and it doesn't.
So I guess that's another side of it. Of like, obviously, there's difficult relationships. There's difficulties in relationships, in healthy ones.
Mhm.
I guess is there a point that can be definitive across the board that says like this has gone too far, this is now hurting us? What the effort that I'm putting in to make it better is not going to have a positive, or you think
Like,
that's
is
a
the
not definable thing?
kind of like is hope's not helping us, but it's more hurting us? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a rough question because I think hope, when you're in an abusive situation, can very quickly be dangerous. And I say that as someone who loves hope and thinks hope is a really powerful part of life as a human being. But I think when you know that hope is becoming dangerous rather than just being a helpful part of your maybe troubled relationship, is when you're hoping for things that aren't happening, when you're always telling yourself, oh, if only he could do this, or I'm just going to hold on until he does this, or when he does this, it'll be better. That's when you know the hope is becoming dangerous, when you're always looking for the what if, not what is happening.
For sure. That's so important. I'm glad you brought light to that.
And I don't know. Hope has always been such an important thing. It was actually kind of learning. It's funny, obviously, storytelling and how much it helps my life of when hope is important and helpful. And obviously, going back to the stories of things like Pandora's box, for example. I don't know how well if you really know the full story of it. When the box is opened, all of the horrors of the world and all these things are left out in the open, and there was one thing left in the box, and the last thing left in the box, and the lid closed was hope. So humanity's
Mhm.
hope is still there. And I think that like the idea of that of is still letting all of the things out from yourself, like all of the bad and all of the things that are hindering you, and finding the positives that you can be hopeful about that you can actually latch onto and have traction with. I feel like I went onto a lot of things that I could be hopeful for that also didn't have traction. They were dreams to make me feel better, but they
Yeah.
weren't attainable. And so it was just a false hope that I was giving myself versus taking small steps towards something that I could build off.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, obviously, like I said, storytelling has always been not just the escape for me, but where I found a lot of myself and my ways out of situations I shouldn't been and growth. But at the same time, it wasn't until I actually took therapy seriously to find out, like, oh, a lot of these stories are coming because your life has been just hellishly jacked up, my friend. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. My characters are pretty rough off.
Oh my gosh. I remember reading your stories like in our early 20s. Sometimes you'd send them to me or poems you'd write, and I'd be like, friend, what are you going through?
Yeah, it was I mean, it's not a phase, okay? Like, I agree. It wasn't emo, it was grief, first of all.
It was grief.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's a valid point because now I'm at the place where I feel like reaching a place where you can look back in the darkness and pull things out of it, you don't get pulled back in is an important place to reach. And it's so hard to even look at that darkness when you're not on that stable.
Yeah. So I think like sometimes we're not only grieving the person, we're grieving who we thought they could become. We're grieving that future we imagined, a family we might have pictured, the conversations we hoped we'd eventually have, or maybe even an apology that we thought would finally make everything make sense. I know I hoped for that a lot. Then, and that letting things go can be incredibly confusing because it feels like we're losing something real, even when parts of it only existed in our imagination. And I don't think that doesn't mean it wasn't a real loss. It means we're grieving possibilities as much as the memories.
Well, obviously, that just brings me back to more stories. Like, so that whole concept obviously brings me, the Captain Ahab, Moby Dick, and chasing the white whale, for example. Like, you're chasing the hope
Mhm.
that you harpoon this thing and it's all over and you're victorious and everything is great at the end. But at what point does that pursuit actually become the important factor versus what you're pursuing?
Mm,
Like chasing the good times or chasing those good things actually becomes more important than the end goal, because I think we always kind of know the end goal probably isn't possible, but yet we keep doing it.
well, that's part of the trap, isn't it? And that's what calls us back, I think, over and over again.
No, not that I'm trying to call my ex-wife Moby Dick or anything like that. That's not what I was.
It was a great analogy.
Yeah,
It's
that
a
was.
good analogy. I loved it.
But yeah, she did. She did. Knock the whole. She did sink the whole ship, I guess.
Well, if we aren't waiting for them to change anymore, what actually tells us we've started to heal? Because we've definitely spent this episode talking about why it's so hard to leave and why it's so hard to stay gone. So, what actually tells you someone is healing? Like, what changes first?
Well, I guess that's actually obviously I have our perspectives from our side, but I guess from even on the professional side, Dr. Ruth, your perspective on that would be
Yeah, I think this is such a good question because once you're out of the relationship, it doesn't feel that different initially. It just feels like you're no longer physically there. But at least for me, I was still very much emotionally there and like mentally trapped with him, even though I no longer shared his space. And I think it was something that just really took time and it took a lot of work on myself. But one of the first things I started noticing was that I stopped feeling like I needed to check in with him when I was going to do something. Like I could go to
Yeah.
the grocery
Mm.
store on my own without letting him know where I was going or okay with him how much money I was going to spend or what I was going to get. And that was one of the very first things, the first month I was out where I went, this is great.
Yeah,
I don't have to do this. And that was huge. That was a huge win for me.
that is a huge win. And I definitely can relate to that because I had components of financial abuse in some relationships. So finally having that autonomy to spend money and make decisions and go places by yourself, and that's huge for sure. That's so powerful that you brought that up. What do you think changes last? And does the pull even completely disappear?
I can only speak from my own lived experience here, but I don't think the pull ever truly disappears. I don't really think
Yeah,
it can when you feel that attached to someone and when you've shared so much of your life with them. I mean, there's
yeah.
still times for me where I wish I could reach out to my ex-husband, which is particularly insane given that I run a channel, an account, and a community all about how abusive he was. But you still miss him sometimes. And I think that's okay. I think the biggest thing is just getting to the point where you're healed enough where you don't feel like you need to act on that. Like you said, getting to that point of stability where you can look back at the darkness and pull things out of it to reflect on or grow from or learn from and not be pulled back into it. And it took me a long time to get
That makes me think of your Don't Go Back series.
there. That's what we're trying to do. Make everyone who's in that period of the relationship where you're out of the darkness but not stable feel less alone, because that was a dark, dark period for me. And I felt crazy. Like I was the only one who had ever gone through it.
Well, it goes into like Wendy and I have mentioned this 1,000 times. Obviously, I'm sure you have as well, where healing isn't linear. For example, like no growth pattern is ever linear, and like reaching a safe point. And when you spoke towards this specifically of finally getting a support, not support, I don't want to say support group, but a foundation of support around you made it easier. Do you feel like the beginning of safety and knowing? Did you feel like having the safety first, or did you have to understand you could have some safety
I had to learn
firsthand?
safety. And I'm still learning safety to this day. Even in a relationship I'm in that's incredibly healthy now, I'm still learning safety and recognize and like not learning to react to things that I might have reacted to that were from an abusive standpoint. And now I might have an interaction with my partner and it's healthy. We have healthy conflict, but then I get scared like, oh no, what if this is gonna go wrong again? Or I'm not sure if that relates to what you meant,
No,
but
absolutely. No, because it is like that. Having a partner, especially, I think that's a huge step, which obviously we've talked about. I'm super proud of you and I'm super happy of taking those steps, but also proud of the person that is taking the time to understand and be safe for you is huge.
Yeah.
Probably even more huge than they realize, because people like that don't give themselves credit. But which, and I have as well. And there'll be moment like without the therapy and without my wife, Des, like there are still moments even as a parent where teenagers just, teenagers are teenagers. And I
I
find
have some of
myself,
those.
yeah, yeah. When an argument happens, like that's a trigger for me, because I feel an argument coming on, and I'm like, oh, I need that. I I'm gonna feel good because and I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's gonna be terrible. What are we talking
Exactly.
about? Like,
Yeah.
and then having somebody to step back and be like, hey, find the line, be firm. You're not wrong. Don't become wrong. Like those types of reminders are huge. And when you have an opponent rather than a lover, relationship, friend, counterpart, when they're your opponent instead, they instead poke and prod those. They know those buttons and they make them they blame you for them at the same time.
That was really well said.
I
They know
agree.
your buttons and they prod them and then blame you for it. So
True.
relatable.
Unfortunately, I hate that it's relatable, but yeah.
I think a lot of people think healing means that you're never going to think about them again, or that you'll stop missing them, or that one day you'll wake up and feel nothing. But I don't think that's how healing works, honestly. It often starts much smaller. And it's that first time you don't check your phone, the weekend you don't wonder what they're doing. Kind of like Ruth said, I went to the grocery store by myself and I didn't ask them what if I could be there or how much I could spend. Or the first time you choose yourself, even though part of you still wants to go back. Healing isn't forgetting. I want to make that so clear. Healing isn't forgetting, it's slowly getting your freedom back.
Well, so I will say, and this is probably a doozy. Do you remember the first time you felt a bit of safety, like really like registered in yourself, like, oh, I'm safer now?
It was in little things and not necessarily just one concrete moment, but then eventually I started to see, wait a minute, I am safe now. I don't have to reach out to this person. I I work through a lot of healing steps with my therapist, a lot of EMDR and just like other exercises that we worked with together to help me find those safe places and to take myself like I have an exercise where like I'll take myself to a safe place in my mind when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I had to learn to build safety in my brain and make my brain learn that safety before I could finally be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm safe."
So glad you answered the way I hoped you would and thought you would from our conversations, because it's like the perfect like scale that I was going for, to then hand it over to Dr. Ruth in a second for the same thing. But mine, I legitimately remember, like, and this is crazy because traveling back and forth, still in the military, like Dez's apartment has just burned down. Like I'm traveling back from Nashville, rushing back to there, and like, so many crazy things had happened. We have an air mattress now. They're safe. Everything's taken care of as far as physically. And then just being together, even in this empty apartment, I slept so freaking. And I'm a terrible sleeper, even like, off and on to this day. But I remember waking up and being like, "Holy cow! I've never felt like belonging and safety more in my entire life than this moment."
That's beautiful, Brian. I'm so
It
glad
is
you had that
beautiful.
moment. I'm gonna cry.
Sorry, yeah, I set you up. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry, but it was.
It was a beautiful moment.
It is beautiful, and I'm so glad that you had that. And I think, like, I I've had several abusive relationships and unhealthy relationships that I've left, and not all of them I went back to. Some of them I did, but I definitely had that pattern of repeating unhealthy relationships. And I think that I every time I would leave, I would and be on my own again, and you'd feel that sense of safety or like relief, or you're finally in your own place, and or you're in a home that's with other people who are safe for you and supportive of you. And I think that you just feel that and when you describe, Brian, and it's so powerful.
And I wonder, in Dr. Ruth, do you, when in looking at these things and studying them and stuff, do you see like a correlation where it's common for especially when it's to a relationship, that the person has the same kind of connection or can't let go of in other areas of abuse in their life, whether it is with a parent or those types of things, where it's a common thing for them to struggle to let go of that type of attachment?
I will say with a lot of the survivors that I work with, there are multiple abusive relationships. And generally, it is a learned thing where you start with an abusive parent or sibling or family member of some kind, progress to an abusive relationship, generally progress to another abusive relationship. And it's hard to see. I definitely think it's a
Yeah. What would you say to someone who just left yesterday?
I'd say congratulations, you're out. No, I would say you are about to embark on what is one of the hardest parts of being in an abusive relationship at all, which is now that you've left, you have to stay out. You have to find your own reasons for staying out. You have to rebuild your life from the ground up. And it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's really, really hard, but it's also so much more worth it than you can even comprehend right now.
Yeah, friend, it's time for your brain to start healing. Well, because I think it's crazy because when you think about it, because the abuse, literally, you get addicted to it and your brain is addicted to it, just like how you can be addicted to drugs. And so when you leave, you're withdrawing almost. And I think that's something that needs to be touched on, I think, as well. That you don't need to, and that a lot of the shame that we mentioned and the guilt, that it's not your fault that you're feeling that pull because your brain is literally hooked to those highs and lows, and you have to, and your brain has to heal from that, and that takes time, and it takes support, and it takes the right environment to heal in. And I think, like you said, it's congratulations on leaving, but this is definitely where it gets hard for, but it's also so worth it. You're worth it.
Absolutely. I hope everyone listening knows that no matter what the situation, you are worth it. I feel like it's still part of the process that even I have to be reminded of, and I'm thankful that I am. But it also does kind of obviously this side of the conversation. So I will kind of open it up and expand on your question even a little bit more, Wendy. If someone is listening right now, they've left, like you said, they're thinking about leaving, or they just got that text again, or they're trying really hard not to respond to it. What do you, from your both of your perspectives, what do you think? What would you hope, positive hope, that they take away from this conversation?
I would hope that they know they're not alone. We have all experienced some version of that. There's so many, literally hundreds of thousands of people who have experienced something just like that. And we know it's hard, but you're definitely not alone in it, and you are strong enough to get through.
I think I wish I'd had someone who could tell me some of the things that we've talked about today years ago, but I had to learn them the hard way. And I think it's important to have conversations like these and to do the work that you're doing, Dr. Ruth, on your platform, Healing by the Numbers. I think you're influencing so many people. I know you are. I've had friends send me your link. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you found her. I've sent you to friends who are getting out of relationships. And I'm like, this is such a good resource. What you've built is an incredible resource for people. And I'm so proud of the work you're doing. And I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today. It's such an honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was truly a joy.
No, 100%. Obviously, I was introduced to you in the work and whatnot through Wendy, and obviously, like a lot of these things of my come from more of the philosophical side and the work that I've done in healthcare and just kind of how I've lived. So obviously, these conversations are important to me, even just on a conversation level outside of a podcast, to dive back into things I haven't thought about or find new ways, perspectives of thinking about it. So it's very, very, very thankful to you for coming in and having the conversation with us and just having a conversation. That's really what we're about here, is making sure people know they have a spot on the couch, and that we're maybe sometimes rambling and talking about experience, but we really want people to know they're not alone, and this community is absolutely there.
Yeah, and I think something I want to close with before we go is that healing usually doesn't happen all at once. It's 100 tiny decisions. The first text you don't answer, the first weekend you don't check their social media, the first time they cross your mind and it doesn't consume your whole day. Those moments don't feel dramatic, but they're often where healing quietly begins. And maybe healing isn't the day you stop loving someone. Maybe it's the day their choices stop deciding yours.
1,000%. And I think even obviously talk about the right now, what I want somebody to take away from this conversation now is almost kind of the same thing I want them to take a year from now and down the road, is also like you're not alone now. You're not ever going to be alone. Like, there are people out there. There is support. And I think one of the biggest things that I'm taking away from today is that missing someone who hurt you isn't evidence that you should go back, but it is evidence you're human, and we all are. Everyone sitting here is.
Mhm.
Is further proof that
And if that's where you are right now, I hope this conversation helped replace a little bit of shame with a little more understanding that healing isn't linear, it isn't perfect, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen.
Second all of that.
So, Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing with your experience and everything you've learned through your work. We'll have links to Dr. Ruth and Healing by the Numbers in the description if you'd like to continue learning from her work.
Absolutely, and I recommend that. And if this conversation resonates with you, and we'd always love to hear from you and have you subscribe and follow us. You can find us on Threads, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. If you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, please send it. Sometimes the words we need to hear most are the ones that someone else has had to hand to it.
Thanks for spending this time with us, and we'll see you next time on the Existential Couch.